It was one of those rainy evenings in Manhattan when the city seemed to move at half its usual pace. The streets were slick with water, reflecting the neon lights like a kaleidoscope of colors. Eleanor Harper Ellie, as everyone called her, was walking home after a long shift at the hospital. She worked as a nurse, a job that demanded everything from her but gave back just enough to keep her going. Her scrubs were damp from the rain and her sneakers squished with every step, but she didn't mind. All she could think about was getting back to her son. Max. Max was 8 years old, full of energy, and had a laugh that could light up even the darkest days. He was waiting for her at their tiny apartment, probably watching cartoons or building some crazy contraption out of Legos. Ellie smiled at the thought. Life wasn't easy. She juggled work, bills, and raising Max alone, but she wouldn't trade it for anything. Helping people came naturally to her, whether it was comforting a scared patient or making sure Max felt loved, no matter what. As she crossed Fifth Avenue, something caught her eye. Up ahead, there were flashing red and blue lights. Cars had slowed down, drivers craning their necks to see what had happened. Ellie hesitated for only a second before quickening her steps toward the commotion. It wasn't curiosity driving her, it was instinct. If someone needed help, she couldn't just walk away. When she reached the scene, her stomach dropped. A sleek black car, the kind you'd expect to see in magazines, had skidded off the road and slammed into a lamppost. Steam hissed from under. The hood and shards of glass glittered on the wet pavement. Bystanders stood around, unsure of what to do. Some were filming with their phones. Others whispered nervously. Ellie pushed through the crowd without thinking twice. She peered inside the car and saw a man slumped over the steering wheel. His suit looked expensive, tailored perfectly, but now it was soaked and stained with blood trickling down his forehead. His breathing was shallow, and his eyes were closed. Time slowed down as Ellie's training kicked in. She didn't panic. Instead, she assessed the situation quickly. Was the car stable? Could it catch fire? Was he still breathing? "Hey, can someone call 911?" she shouted over her shoulder. Someone nodded, already dialing. Ellie carefully opened the door, wincing, as it creaked loudly. She leaned in, checking his pulse. It was weak but steady. "Sir, can you hear me?" she asked firmly, tapping his cheek gently. No response. She knew she had to act fast. Using her jacket, she pressed it against his head wound to stop the bleeding. Then she tilted his head slightly to open his airway. Cars honked in the background, and the rain continued to pour, soaking her to the bone, but Ellie didn't notice any of it. Her focus was entirely on the man in front of her. While she worked, her fingers brushed against something cold around his neck, a locket. It must have been tucked under his shirt, but the impact of the crash had pulled it loose. Curious, Ellie glanced at it. Inside the small golden frame was a faded photograph. Her breath hitched as she recognized the faces staring back at her. They looked so familiar, though she couldn't quite place them. Shaking off the odd feeling, she refocused on keeping him alive until help arrived. Minutes later, the paramedics showed up, taking over where Ellie left off. She stepped back, letting them do their job, but not before slipping a note into the man's pocket with her name and number written hastily on it. "Just in case," she muttered under her breath. She didn't know why she did it. Maybe it was hope that he'd want to thank her someday, or maybe it was just habit. Either way, it felt right. As the ambulance sped away, Ellie realized how much her hands were shaking. Adrenaline coursed through her veins, leaving her both drained and exhilarated. She turned to leave, pulling her hood tighter against the rain. But something lingered in her mind, the image of that locket and the faces inside it. She shook her head, dismissing the thought. There was no point dwelling on it now. She had done her part, and that was all that mattered. But as she walked home, Ellie couldn't shake the nagging feeling that this stranger's life and hers might be more connected than she could ever imagine. The man in the car turned out to be Alexander Whitmore III, a name that meant nothing to Ellie at first. But anyone who lived in Manhattan or even watched the news knew exactly who he was. He was the billionaire CEO of Whitmore Tech, a company that made gadgets and software people couldn't live without. His face was plastered on billboards and magazine covers, always wearing an expensive suit and a serious expression. To most people, he was untouchable, a man who lived in a world far removed from everyday struggles. But lying in a hospital bed with bandages wrapped around his head, Alex didn't look like the powerful figure everyone talked about. He looked human, vulnerable even. When he woke up, groggy and disoriented, the first thing he remembered was a pair of kind eyes staring down at him through the chaos of the crash. Those eyes belonged to the woman who had saved his life. Alex wasn't used to feeling gratitude. In fact, he wasn't used to feeling much of anything anymore. Years of building his empire had hardened him. Success came at a price, and for Alex, that price was connection. Friends were business associates, relationships were transactions, and emotions were luxuries he couldn't afford. Yet here he was, alive because a stranger had risked her own safety to help him, when the nurses handed him the note Ellie had. Left behind, Alex read it over and over again. Asterisk, glad you're okay, take care. It was simple, unassuming, but it carried a warmth he hadn't felt in years. Something about those words and the memory of her calm presence stirred something deep inside him. He decided right then and there that he needed to meet her. A few days later, Alex sent a sleek black car to pick Ellie up. She hesitated when the driver showed up at her apartment building. "Are you sure this is for me?" she asked, looking at the luxury vehicle like it might disappear if she blinked. The driver confirmed it, handing her a small card with Alex's name printed neatly on it. Ellie sighed, glancing back at Max, who was sitting cross-legged on the floor, engrossed in his favorite cartoon. "Mom, are you going to see the rich guy?" he asked innocently. Ellie chuckled. "I guess I am." The ride to Alex's penthouse office felt surreal. Ellie had never been in a car this fancy before. The leather seats smelled expensive, and the city outside blurred past in streaks of light. She kept reminding herself why she was doing this, to say thank you properly and maybe clear her head of the strange feeling that had lingered since the accident. When she arrived, Alex greeted her warmly, though there was still a hint of awkwardness in his demeanor. He thanked her profusely, his words sincere but tinged with formality, like he wasn't quite sure how to express what he was feeling. Then came the moment Ellie had anticipated, the offer of a reward. "I want to compensate you," Alex said. Leaning forward slightly, "Name your price." "Anything you need, consider it done." Ellie raised an eyebrow, caught off guard by his directness. "You don't have to do that," she replied firmly. "I'm just glad you're okay." Alex blinked, surprised by her refusal. Most people would jump at the chance to ask for money or favors, but not her. There was no ulterior motive in her voice, no hint of greed, just honesty. For a moment he found himself envying her simplicity. Her life was clearly not easy. She worked long hours, raised a child alone, and probably worried about bills more often than she'd admit, but she radiated a quiet strength that money couldn't buy. They talked for a while, sharing bits and pieces of their lives. Ellie mentioned Max, her late parents, and her love for nursing. Alex listened intently, nodding occasionally but saying little about himself. He was guarded, as if revealing too much might make him vulnerable. But despite his reserved nature, Ellie sensed a loneliness in him that mirrored her own in some ways. They were two people navigating very different worlds, yet somehow connected by fate, before she left. Alex impulsively invited her to a charity gala he was hosting the following week. "It's nothing formal," he assured her, though his tone suggested otherwise. "Just a way to give back." "I'd really like you to come." Ellie hesitated. Galas weren't exactly her scene. She imagined glittering chandeliers, champagne, flutes, and women in gowns worth more than her annual salary. But there was something genuine in Alex's invitation, a flicker of hope that maybe this encounter could lead to something meaningful. After a pause, she nodded. "Okay," she said softly. "I'll think about it." As she walked back to the car, Ellie couldn't shake the image of Alex sitting behind his massive desk, surrounded by reminders of his success but looking like a man searching for something he couldn't quite name. She wondered if saving his life had been more than just a random act of kindness. Maybe it was the start of something bigger something. Neither of them could have predicted. The day of the gala arrived sooner than Ellie expected. She borrowed a dress from a coworker, a simple navy blue gown that fit surprisingly well. Standing In front of the mirror, she smoothed her hair and took a deep breath. This wasn't her world, but she reminded herself that she was doing this for Alex, not because she owed him anything, but because she wanted to understand him better. When she stepped into the grand ballroom, the opulence hit her like a wave. Crystal chandeliers sparkled above, casting a warm glow over the elegantly dressed guests. Waiters glided between tables, carrying trays of hors d'oeuvres and champagne. Ellie felt out of place, clutching her glass of sparkling water like a lifeline. But then she spotted Alex across the room, and he waved her over throughout the evening. Alex introduced her to various guests, calling her the woman who saved my life, with a smile that seemed almost proud. Ellie blushed each time, brushing off the compliments with modesty. What struck her most, however, was how Alex treated her not as someone beneath him, but as an equal. He valued her opinion, listened to her stories, and laughed at her jokes. It was refreshing, especially compared to the superficial conversations happening around them. During a lull in the festivities, Alex pulled out the locket she had noticed at the crash site. "I've been meaning to show you this," he said, holding it up. Inside were two photographs, one of a young girl who bore an uncanny resemblance to Ellie and another of a smiling couple. Alex explained that he didn't remember where the locket came from. It had simply been in his possession since childhood. Ellie's heart skipped a beat. She leaned closer, studying the pictures. The couple looked familiar, painfully so. Her voice trembled as she spoke. "Those are my parents," she whispered, her eyes widening in disbelief. "They passed away when I was 6. My brother and we were separated after that." Alex froze, processing her words. Memories began flooding back, fragmented images of whispers and explanations he hadn't understood as a child. Someone had told him once that his family had taken in a baby boy after a tragedy, but no one had ever mentioned a daughter. Could Ellie be the sister he never knew he had? Neither of them spoke for a moment, the weight of the revelation hanging in the air. The gala faded into the background as they stared at each other. Realizing that their meeting hadn't been coincidence, it was destiny. The revelation at the gala left both Ellie and Alex stunned. They stood there, surrounded by laughter and clinking glasses, but it felt like the world had slowed to a crawl. The locket dangled between them, its weight heavier than either of them could have imagined. Ellie's hands trembled as she held it closer, her mind racing with questions. How could this be possible? Why hadn't anyone told her about him? And what had happened to her brother all those years ago? Alex, for his part, was equally overwhelmed. He had spent most of his life believing he was an only child, raised in privilege but also in isolation. His parents had been loving, yes, but distant, always busy with work or charity events or social obligations. As a kid, he'd often wondered if something was missing, some piece of his family puzzle that didn't quite fit. Now, staring at Ellie, he realized that missing piece might have been standing right in front of him. "We need answers," Alex said finally, breaking the silence. His voice was firm, but there was a vulnerability in his eyes that Ellie hadn't seen before. "This isn't just a coincidence. There's more to this story." Ellie nodded, swallowing hard. "I agree, but where do we even start?" Alex didn't hesitate. "We hire someone who knows how to dig. Someone who can find out what really happened back then." The next morning, they met with a private investigator named Greg, a no-nonsense guy with sharp eyes and a notebook that seemed permanently attached to his hand. Ellie and Alex sat across from him in a quiet office, explaining everything they knew or thought they knew about their pasts. Greg listened carefully, jotting down notes and occasionally asking clarifying questions. By the end of the meeting, he promised to get to the bottom of things. In the days that followed, Ellie couldn't focus on anything else. Her shifts at the hospital felt longer than usual, her mind constantly drifting to the possibilities. What if Greg found nothing? What if the truth was too painful to bear? She tried to distract herself by spending time with Max, baking cookies or playing board games, but even her son noticed something was different. "Mom, why are you so quiet lately?" Max asked one evening as they sat on the couch together. He looked up at her with big, curious eyes, his head resting on her shoulder. Ellie smiled softly, brushing a strand of hair away from his face. Just thinking about some stuff, kiddo. Nothing for you to worry about, Max frowned, unconvinced. Is it about that rich guy? The one you saved? She chuckled, surprised by his perceptiveness. Sort of, but don't worry, okay? Everything's going to be fine. Meanwhile, Alex threw himself into work, using it as a way to cope with the whirlwind of emotions swirling inside him. But even in the middle of meetings or strategy sessions, his thoughts kept returning to Ellie. He admired her strength, her resilience, and the way she carried herself with such grace, despite the challenges life had thrown her way. She reminded him of everything he'd single quote to dashionate, compassionate. Real? When Greg finally called them in for a follow-up meeting, Ellie and Alex arrived together, their nerves palpable. The investigator spread out a series of documents on the table, each one telling a fragment of their shared history. Slowly, the pieces began to fall into place. It turned out that after Ellie and Alex's parents died in a car accident, their father had made a heart-wrenching decision. Desperate to protect his children, he arranged for them to be separated. Alex, still a baby at the time, was taken in by a wealthy couple, the Whitmores, who had connections to the family. Ellie, however, was placed in foster care. Their father had hoped that splitting them up would give them both a better chance at stability, but the plan backfired. Over time, records were lost, details forgotten, and the siblings drifted further apart until they became strangers. As Greg explained. All of this, tears welled up in Ellie's eyes. She clenched her fists tightly, trying to hold herself together. So we've been apart all this time, because of a mistake? She asked, her voice trembling. It wasn't entirely a mistake, Greg replied gently. Your father loved you both very much. He did what he thought was best under impossible circumstances. Unfortunately, the system failed you. Alex leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair. He looked exhausted, overwhelmed by the enormity of what they'd just learned. All these years, he murmured, almost to himself. I never knew, I never even suspected. Ellie reached out, placing a hand on his arm. It was a small gesture, but it spoke volumes. For the first time, they weren't just two strangers brought together by fate, they were family. Blood relatives. Bound by lost love and the hope of rediscovery, over the next few weeks, they began piecing their lives back together. Alex invited Ellie and Max to his penthouse for dinner, eager to spend more time with the sister he'd never known. At first, Max was shy, intimidated by the sprawling apartment and the towering shelves filled with books and awards. But Alex quickly won him over with stories about his own childhood and promises to teach him how to play chess. For Ellie, getting to know Alex was bittersweet. On one hand, she was thrilled to have found a sibling she hadn't realized she was missing. On the other hand, she couldn't help but feel anger toward the system that had kept them apart for so long. What kind of world allowed families to be torn apart like that? What kind of justice was there for people like her parents, whose final wish had been twisted into decades of separation? Despite the challenges, they worked hard to build a relationship. Alex introduced Ellie to his closest friends, many of whom were shocked to learn about her existence. Some were skeptical at first, wondering if she was after Alex's money, but Ellie's sincerity quickly won them over. In turn, Ellie helped Alex reconnect with the simpler joys of life, like cooking a meal from scratch or watching a sunset without checking his phone. One evening, as they sat on Alex's balcony overlooking the city, Ellie turned to him with a thoughtful expression. Do you ever think about how different our lives could have been if we'd grown up together? She asked. Alex sighed, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. Every day, he admitted. But I also think about how lucky we are to have found each other now. We can't change the past, but we can make the most of the future. Ellie smiled, feeling a sense of peace wash over her. For the first time in years, she felt like she truly belonged somewhere. And as they sat there, side by side, it became clear that their bond was stronger than any obstacle they might face. Together, they were ready to rewrite their story not as victims of circumstance, but as survivors determined to honor their parents' legacy. As the weeks turned into months, Ellie and Alex found themselves navigating uncharted territory. They weren't just siblings reconnecting, they were two people from vastly different worlds, trying to bridge a gap that had been decades in the making. It wasn't always easy. There were moments of awkwardness, misunderstandings, and even frustration. But through it all, they held on to the one thing that mattered most, their shared determination to build a real relationship. Alex struggled with balancing his demanding career and this newfound chapter of his life. Running a multi-billion-dollar company meant long hours, endless meetings, and constant pressure to stay ahead. For years, he'd prided himself on being self-reliant, on not needing anyone else. But now, with Ellie and Max in his life, he realized how lonely he'd been. He wanted to be present for them, to show up as the brother and uncle they deserved, but old habits died hard. One evening, after a particularly grueling day at work, Alex arrived late to dinner at Ellie's apartment. Max was already in bed and Ellie was clearing the dishes, looking tired but content. When she saw him walk in, her expression softened. "You didn't have to come," she said gently. "I know how busy you are." "I wanted to," Alex replied, shrugging off his coat. "Besides, I promised Max I'd read him a bedtime story tonight." "Can I still do that?" Ellie nodded, smiling faintly. "He'll be thrilled." "Go ahead, he's probably pretending to." "Sleep just so he doesn't miss you." Alex headed to Max's room, where the little boy lay curled up under his blanket, clutching a stuffed dinosaur. Hearing footsteps, Max peeked one eye open and grinned when he saw Alex. "Uncle Alex!" he whispered excitedly, sitting up. "Did you bring the chessboard?" "Not tonight, champ," Alex chuckled, ruffling his hair. "But I did bring something better, a story about knights and dragons." "Ready?" Max nodded eagerly, scooting over to make space for Alex on the edge of the bed. As Alex read aloud, his voice steady and warm, Max listened intently, his eyes wide with wonder. Watching them together, Ellie leaned against the doorway, her heart swelling with gratitude. She had worried at first that introducing Alex into their lives might disrupt the close bond she shared with Max. Instead, it felt like their family was expanding in the best possible way, but while Alex was learning to adapt to his role as an uncle, Ellie faced her own challenges. Raising Max alone had taught her to rely solely on herself, and trusting someone else, even her own brother, didn't come naturally. She worried about leaning too much on Alex, about letting him take on responsibilities that weren't his to bear. Yet every time she tried to pull back, Alex would insist otherwise. "You're my sister," he told her one afternoon as they sat in a quiet cafe near Central Park. "This isn't charity, it's family. Let me help." Ellie sighed, stirring her coffee absent-mindedly. "I know, and I appreciate it more than you realize, but I don't want Max getting used to having, well, everything handed to him. Life hasn't exactly been fair to us, but we've managed okay on our own. And you've done an incredible job," Alex said firmly. "But managing okay isn't the same as thriving. You deserve more, Ellie, both of you do." His words lingered in her mind long after their conversation ended. Deep down, she knew he was right. Still, it was hard to let go of the fear that accepting help might somehow diminish her independence or change the dynamic she cherished with Max. Slowly, though, she began to trust Alex not because he pushed her, but because he listened. He respected her boundaries and never made her feel like she owed him anything. Their connection deepened further when Alex suggested creating a tribute to their parents. He had always admired Ellie's dedication to nursing and saw an opportunity to honor their mom and dad in a meaningful way. "What if we built a medical center?" he proposed one evening during one of their phone calls. "Something state-of-the-art focused on emergency care and community outreach. We could name it after them." Ellie was speechless at first. The idea seemed almost too big, too overwhelming. But as Alex explained his vision-free clinics for underserved neighborhoods, scholarships for aspiring nurses, programs to support single parents like herself, she felt tears prick her eyes. This wasn't just a project, it was a legacy. A way to keep their parents' memory alive while helping others in need. "Yes," she said softly, her voice thick with emotion. "Yes, I think they'd love that." With Ellie's blessing, Alex threw himself into planning the project. He consulted with architects, nonprofit experts, and healthcare professionals, ensuring every detail aligned with their vision. Ellie played a crucial role too, offering insights from her years of experience on the front lines of medicine. Together, they worked tirelessly, fueled by a shared purpose that brought them even closer. Through it all, Max became a cherished part of their journey. Whether it was sketching designs for the medical center or brainstorming names for its pediatric wing, he embraced the project with the same enthusiasm he brought to everything else. "Can we call it the Harper Whitmore Healing Place?" he asked one day, looking up at Ellie and Alex expectantly. They exchanged amused glances before nodding in agreement. "Perfect," Alex said, tousling Max's hair. "Our parents would. Be proud." As the pieces of their lives continued to fall into place, Ellie and Alex reflected on how far they'd come. Their reunion hadn't erased the pain of their past, the loss of their parents, the years they'd spent apart, but it had given them something new to hold on to: hope, purpose, and most importantly, each other. One crisp autumn morning, as they walked through Central Park together, Alex turned to Ellie with a thoughtful expression. "Do you ever wonder what they'd say if they could see us now?" he asked. Ellie smiled, her gaze drifting toward the golden leaves fluttering in the breeze. "I think they'd be happy," she replied. "Not because of the money or the projects, but because we found each other. That's what they would have wanted, to see us whole again." Alex nodded, feeling a sense of peace settle over him. For the first time in his life, he understood what it meant to truly belong. And as they stood there, side by side, surrounded by the beauty of the season, he knew that their story was only beginning. Months had passed since Ellie and Alex first discovered their connection, and the bond they shared had grown stronger with each passing day. They weren't just siblings anymore, they were partners in building something bigger than themselves. The medical center project was nearing completion, a testament to their parents' legacy and their own resilience. But as much as they focused on honoring the past, they also wanted to celebrate the present, the newfound family they'd created together. Alex decided it was time for another gathering. But this one wouldn't be like the glitzy charity gala where they'd first pieced together their connection. Instead, he planned an intimate evening at his penthouse, a small celebration for the people who mattered most: Ellie, Max, and a handful of close friends who had become part of their journey. It wasn't about impressing anyone. It was about gratitude and love. On the night of the gathering, Ellie arrived early, carrying a tray of homemade cookies she'd baked with Max. She still felt out of place in Alex's luxurious world, but there was a warmth now that made her feel less like an outsider and more like someone who belonged. Max ran ahead of her, excited to show Alex the new chess strategy he'd been practicing. As Ellie stepped inside, she noticed how Alex had decorated the space photos of their parents, sketches of the medical center, and even a few of Max's drawings pinned to the walls. It was personal, heartfelt, and completely unexpected. "You did all this?" Ellie asked, her voice soft with surprise. Alex nodded, smiling sheepishly. "I wanted tonight to feel special, not just for us, but for everyone who's been part of this journey." Ellie hugged him tightly, overcome with emotion. For years, she'd carried the weight of loss and loneliness, believing she was meant to face life's challenges alone. Now, standing here, surrounded by reminders of her family's love, she realized how wrong she'd been. Family wasn't just blood, it was the people who stood by you, who lifted you up when you couldn't stand on your own. As the evening unfolded, laughter filled the room. Max entertained everyone with stories from school, while Ellie and Alex shared updates on the medical center. Friends toasted to their partnership, marveling at how far they'd come in such a short time. One guest, a fellow nurse Ellie worked with, raised her glass and said, "To second chances and to finding what we didn't even know we were missing." The words struck a chord with Ellie. Second chances were rare, especially in a world that often felt so unforgiving. Yet here she was, living proof that life could surprise you in the best possible ways. Saving Alex's life hadn't just changed his fate, it had changed hers too. In helping him, she'd found herself later that night, after the guests had left and Max was fast asleep on the couch. Ellie and Alex sat together on the balcony overlooking the city. The skyline sparkled below, a sea of lights stretching endlessly into the distance. Neither of them spoke for a while, content to simply sit in comfortable silence. "I've been thinking," Alex said finally, breaking the quiet, "about how different my life would have been if I'd known about you growing up." Ellie turned to look at him, her expression thoughtful. "Me too. I spent so many years wondering if I had any family left. And now," she trailed off, her voice thick with emotion, "now I can't imagine my life without you in it." Alex reached over, squeezing her hand. "We lost a lot of time, but we're making up for it together." They talked late into the night, sharing memories and dreams for the future. Ellie spoke about her hopes for Max, that he'd grow up knowing he was loved, no matter what path he chose. Alex admitted he wanted to slow down, to spend less time chasing success and more time nurturing relationships. They laughed about old quirks they'd inherited from their parents, like Alex's habit of organizing everything perfectly, a trait Ellie teased him mercilessly about, and her tendency to hum when she was nervous. As New Year's Eve approached, Alex revealed one last surprise. He'd arranged for a private viewing of the nearly completed medical center before its official opening. Standing in the lobby, surrounded by sleek design and cutting-edge technology, Ellie felt tears welling up in her eyes. A plaque near the entrance read, Harper Whitmore Healing Place, dedicated to lives saved and stories shared. This is incredible, Ellie whispered, running her fingers over the engraved words. Mom and Dad would be so proud. They are, Alex replied simply. Through us. In that moment, Ellie understood something profound. Their story wasn't just about loss or reunion, it was about healing, about taking broken pieces and turning them into something whole again. By saving Alex's life, she had saved a piece of her own. And in rediscovering each other, they had given their parents' love a new home. As fireworks lit up the sky on New Year's Eve, marking the start of a fresh chapter, Ellie looked around at the people she loved most. Max was giggling as Alex taught him how to make confetti explode with a tiny handheld popper. Friends chatted animatedly, glasses clinking in celebration. And above it all, the city buzzed with energy, alive with possibility. Ellie took a deep breath, feeling a sense of peace wash over her. Life hadn't gone according to plan, not for her, not for Alex, and certainly not for their parents. But sometimes plans didn't matter. What mattered was the connections we forged, the love we shared, and the courage to keep moving forward. Even when the road seemed uncertain. As the clock struck midnight, Ellie leaned against Alex's shoulder, watching the fireworks reflect off the windows of the medical center. For the first time in years, she felt truly whole. Her heart, once fractured by loss, had been mended, not perfectly, but beautifully. And in that imperfection lay its strength. Together, they had found their way back to each other. And together they would continue to heal, to grow, and to build a future brighter than anything they could have imagined alone.